Good morning and welcome to Office Hours. It's great to have you here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour, a general discussion of production and IT-related topics where we answer audience-submitted questions. That means you can put questions in, and we do our best to answer them. The second hour is typically a deeper dive into a topic, and today will be a lot of fun. Our second hour features Keenan Campbell, a longtime experienced emergency manager who will help us look at preparedness as a topic, what to do when things go wrong. So Keenan's been a friend of the show for a long time, and it's great to have him here today. All of that said, it's time to get into the regular Q&A. So Mitchell, what have we got today?
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. First question coming into us from Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington. You have allocated $25,000 budget for a booth at a 2023 trade show to show your physical product. Would you still spend it on the show or do something virtually?
And Nigel's going to start us off this morning.
So I think there are a bunch of variables here I would talk about. I mean, if we were talking about CES, then $25,000 won't pay your internet costs. So, you've got to be really careful. But here's the things I think about. What is the event? How well is the product known? And how much of your audience that you want to get to know the product is at the event? So we go sometimes to events where we can find practically all the people we need to influence. So putting a stand there, if you're not known, is actually quite good because then at least they're going to walk past you. Doing a virtual event when nobody knows who you are, you stand the risk of nobody coming. So I think you've got to look at those variables. So if it's a constrained audience who needs to know about a product that is not known today, it can be a very effective way. If it's a huge event, or if they already know the product and you're updating it or adding new features, there may be better ways of doing it.
Mitchell.
Yeah, I think Nigel is spot on with that. It's complicated because I think it's heading that way. I think it's heading towards virtual, and we've discussed this before on the show. The way we've been covering NAB and NAM and IBC and Cinegear probably is more towards the future. So the idea would be eventually there'll be a situation where you can see somebody virtually going into the booth and showing the product off. And in the back end, we're asking questions, and then those questions are relayed to the people that are there. I think that there's a lot to be said for that, especially when it costs, as Nigel was saying, it costs so much money to do these shows. And you know who ultimately pays for that? It goes into the price of whatever it is that you're buying, whether it's software or hardware.
John Prado.
Spend $25,000 advertising on office hours and do your presentation in here. That's what I would do.
That would be interesting. I'm not sure there's a place to put it right now. But anyway, my experience from decades of attending trade shows, in the beginning, you went to see the stuff that you couldn't see in real life. So brochures are fine and online is fine. Some things you just need to kind of handle and talk to. I know that when we see the trade shows these days, one of the most active areas is when Blackmagic sets up a whole range of their cameras, and everybody can go and just touch them and figure out where the controls are and whether they fit in your hands and things like that. So there is that tactile thing. But I'll also say I made the big transition, even at NAB for years, of understanding at first the show, I thought the show was about the things that the show had to show me. And I started realizing that, no, it was actually about the people I could meet. That was far more important than the things. And now that we're virtualized, the one thing I'm a little concerned of as we go everything online and everything virtual is that it's a little harder, I think, to make these human connections across a Zoom meeting, particularly when you're in a kind of a Zoom format where one person is presenting and everybody is on Zoom kind of watching like the trade show larger demos. I think that's harder now without the in-person stuff. So I don't know what the hybrid will be that comes out of this, but I hope that we manage to get a combination, a little more about what we've done here at Office Hours, which is we all met virtually, but now we've made a lot of connections and we've actually met each other in person at some of the events we do. So you get the combination of the easier access to information, but then the human connection of actually being able to sit across from somebody, share a cup of coffee, and get to know them a little better. So next question.
Next question in from Todd Worley in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, trying to help a friend who is a school administrator and wants to get several students to produce a weekly newscast by Zoom. What was the inexpensive headset mic I've heard referenced on office hours? Pyle or Polsen model? Thanks.
Mitch, go ahead.
Well, you go from the top down, Countryman, DPA. I would say the Pyle and then the Polsen. But the other thing to take into consideration, I don't know what requirements at your school are yet with the COVID thing on us. A headset mic is going to require a little bit more tender loving care to keep them clean and drug-free, bug-free, so to speak. So maybe you should be thinking about a lavalier.
Yeah, they're all really good references. I do think things have changed a little bit. I know my son, when he was back there, and he's in his 30s now, back when he was doing it, they had a broadcast from the elementary school for inside the elementary school. And the kids really loved producing that. The fact that their school can put it on the web now, I think would be charming if you can keep everything under control. In terms of the Pyle and Polsen, those were models that we found really early when the show, part of the show's function was to try to help educators make this transition to teach from home. And they rose and fell based on the model. I know for a while, I think it was the Pyle had an easy connection, and then they somehow changed the wiring and it got a little more difficult. There are a lot of inexpensive headset type mics that can do this job for you pretty well, made by a lot of companies. I just think figure your budget out, try to get enough from, and I think Mitch's point was well taken in terms of cleaning and maintenance and robustness. Kids are not known for being easy on equipment. So those things can make a difference. Nigel, you had a thought?
I was going to say I have one of the Pyles. I think it was $35. So, $35, you can afford to buy a bunch of them and make sure everybody has their own one. The other thing you've got to think about is what your audio chain is, because those end at 3.5 mil jacks. Is that what your audio chain looks like? What does the whole thing look like? Got to make sure your mics match what the rest of you're doing.
Excellent point. And you get into phantom power and things like that on certain kinds of mics. So yes, all of those things need to be factored in. Mitchell, you had another thought?
I just want to point out to Nigel's point, there are a number of adapters that are made. It'll go 3.5 to XLR. I think Rode even makes one. So you could solve that problem with one of those devices.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida. Help! ZoomISO version 2 seems to need permissions, co-host, no cloud recording, etc. How do you get it to output with the restrictions?
Peter Sargent's going to help us here.
So congratulations, you found all the restrictions that it needs to have, except you don't actually need to have co-host. The host can grant individuals the right to record, but because they're now using the SDK for their interface, they need that same interface for ZoomISO to pull the individual ISOs out. As to no cloud recordings, again, politely go read the documentation. There is a piece that says, thou shalt enable the cloud recording before you enable ZoomISO. You have to do it in the correct order to actually record things. Okay. But you can do it all with a normal participant or attendee on a meeting can do it as long as the host grants them recording privileges.
Excellent. Sounds like that could go a long way, Andy, toward helping you solve the problem. Let's move to the next question.
And it's from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. What are your thoughts on the DJI Osmo Mobile 6 smartphone gimbal?
Chris Widener's going to help us out here.
As I say, I've used the 5 for quite a while. The 6 has got some interesting new features, and they've moved a few things around. The thing that I think is interesting is they've added a fair bit of weight to it. So if you're running around and not using it on a monopod or something where it's more stabilized, it could get a little wearing after a while.
Interesting. I will say that I'm still using a DJI Osmo 4, and it's still doing great work. They are, I think, probably the leader in those small gimbal type devices. I know Zoom, and there's some other companies who compete with them very robustly. So I'm not saying it's the only one, but everything I've ever done with one of the DJI products, it's worked as advertised and been a pretty good value for the money. Let's go to the next question.
From David Brady in New York, New York. David asks, what design tools do you use in pre-visualizing AV rack build-outs? Are there any favorites that have equipment templates?
And we're going to start with Tom Ferguson.
Well, I just built this rack behind me, and I was using draw.io online. They also have a download app, and that way I could lay it out and move equipment around and figure out how I wanted it.
Mitch Hill.
You can get a block diagram with a great piece of software called Here to Record, or at least that's the site that has it. You can lay things out in a block way. It doesn't build it out just like the picture that Tom was just showing, but it will allow you to get a flow chart.
And John Preto.
I freeform in Keynote first, and then I moved to a CAD drawing program. The last one I used was Middle Atlantic for my rack. Middle Atlantic's got some amazing CAD tools for building the racks out.
They do. They've been in the rack business for a long time. And the one that I use typically is called OmniGraffle. It's from the Omni Group. They have a lot of products that have been around in the Mac world for a long time. And a lot of us who were there early in that just depend on that tool for any of our kind of rectilinear drawing things. So if you need to make rectangles and circles, and you can do freeform and stuff like that, but it's just super fast and you can connect things together with pathways. It's a pretty robust design tool for things like laying out a rack. Let's go to the next question.
And we are zooming through our questions and answering them very quickly, so we always could use more. If you'd like to put them in, go to Makana, become a producer, and add them in. And ask a question like Tom Ferguson from Phoenix, Arizona is, have you seen the Accsoon SeeMo HDMI input for the iPhone? Thoughts? There's a link to it. What do you think?
And when I was clicking on this, I didn't realize that Tom had asked the question, and I put Chris Wider in front of him, so I'm going to call an audible and switch those. And let's go to Tom first so he can better explain what this question was all about. Sorry, back end, guys. Oops. Tom, are you there? Can't hear anything.
Sorry. I saw Caleb Pike do a review on DSLR Video Shooter about this device. While it still has a rough build, it sounds very interesting. It allows you to take your iPhone, mount it on the top of your video camera, say a Canon R5, and use it like the Atomos Ninja. Has a lot of different functions, the zebras, the waveforms, and so forth. It's just an HDMI in to an iPhone, which is something we haven't seen before.
The big question with this name is, does it let you SeeMo? Chris Widener.
Yeah, we've seen similar devices for Android, and they're interesting. I've got a couple of them that I've been testing out. We had looked at them for doing Instagram broadcasts. The problem is until the actual iOS comes out with integration for it, it's going to be kind of iffy whether it's a truly useful tool.
And John Preto.
This was brought up last week in office hours, and I think Alex said he was going to buy one and test it out.
Okay. So maybe keep hanging on with us here at Office Hours. And if Alex had the time to do that on his busy schedule this week, maybe on the weekend or afterwards, he'll have some direct personal experience with it. That'd be great. Next question.
From David Brady in New York, New York. David asks, one of my headless playback Macs, a 2018 Mini running Monterey, snoozes or drops the ARD VNC into it for management and setup. Are there any methods to re-initialize network and power management or otherwise troubleshoot without rebuilding?
Peter Sargent's going to start us off here.
Well, the basic one is to check the power management settings and make sure it's got wake on LAN turned on. Otherwise, it will go sleep and the network will go sleep at the same time. And then the other ones I always make sure I've got turned on as auto start when power restored, because sometimes power drops. But the wake on LAN is the important one in this case. Okay.
Serge, you had thoughts?
If you have a weird issue, one thing you could try is the usual reset of the NVM and the SMC. If you Google your Mac model with that, instruction will appear from the Apple website.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. Next question, please.
Mark Steele, Orlando, Florida. Mark asks, saw a post by David Paskins in Discord yesterday on this UVC webcam to HDMI adapter. He's referring to the Obsbot device that I think a few people have bought but haven't quite been able to demo it.
And Tom Ferguson, I think, is going to help us with this.
Well, I tried it out, but unfortunately, I don't have the Obsbot camera. I used it with an Insta360 link, and while it worked well, it didn't pass through those particular remote control features, but the Obsbot camera works well with it.
Okay. So if you have the right hardware, sounds like a good solution. Chris Widener, more thoughts?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because with the Obsbot system, you have a wireless remote to control your positioning. So it's kind of a nice tool for using specifically with atems, because you can pre-program up to 3 positions with the remote, control it, and have it come out through HDMI. So it's an interesting system.
Nice. All right. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, with Apple's introduction of a high-yield savings account attached to the Apple Card, do you think this is the road to Apple becoming a financial institution themselves? How could that affect community regional banks in the USA and globally?
This is a big topic. Nigel.
So I think Apple, to some extent, is already a financial institution. I think there was a point a few years ago where they had more cash than the US Federal Reserve. So, you're already dealing at that scale with a company that is managing money. If you get big enough as a business, it really comes about managing money, managing your cash, and keeping going. I don't know how much it's going to affect the US market or, what we think of as the more developed world. I think the biggest impact might be in countries where the banking system is not as strong, where it's very hard to exchange money. And you'll find in some of those countries, the telco and other people have actually become the de facto way of spreading money. I think there are parts, and Alex was probably forgotten about this more than I know, but I know there were parts of Africa, for instance, where people would use a bank on their cell phones because cell phones were pretty free and they were much easier to replace. And that would be the way people would bank. They would exchange money. They would send money. So I think out, in the traditional banking system as we know it in the US, or even within Europe, where there are a much smaller number of large banks, it may become another player. It will probably partner. But there may be parts of the world where it could radically transform how money moves and is managed.
Yeah, I agree with that. John Wallace.
We've seen a large shift with anybody who's providing any sort of credit services to offer deposit services as well. It offers them the ability to leverage their own customers' money to lend to other people, essentially at a 0% interest, at least in the current market, where you see interest rates coming from savings and checking accounts. So it really gets really interesting when you want to start self-funding yourself and then be able to leverage your own customers' money versus anything that you have on the books. It's just a really, really good way to grow your business with low risk.
John Mitchell Hill.
Yeah, all good points. And I guess I would have to question, and maybe they've already answered it, that when you decide to become an actual bank, then you have to put up with certain rules and regulations, the FDIC, other federal, et cetera, et cetera. And that means that they could also, even though they have that gigantic pile of money there in Cupertino, they still can go to the Federal Reserve as a bank. So that's a very interesting combination.
Peter Sargent.
I just want to remind everyone that it may say Apple on the front. It says Barclays card on the back. The financial part of this is actually managed as the bank is actually Barclays Bank.
Yeah, mine says Goldman Sachs on it. So these huge financial institutions are kind of in the back end of the process.
Apple doesn't want to get into the banking business for exactly what Mitchell was saying. Is the regulatory piece of this is insane.
Yeah, I can imagine them wanting to avoid that. I will say that I've heard what Nigel was talking about in terms of micropayments in a lot of the countries in the world. If they have a cell phone, the fact that these organizations are allowing them to handle microfinancing, pay for your sandwich, get your paycheck and things like that via your phone without having the traditional formal arrangement with a banking institution. Plus, boy, banking institutions seem to be changing really fast. I don't know if you guys have tried to get into a physical branch, but I know here in Southern California after the pandemic, a lot of them closed down. A lot of them, they're not looking for people to come in. They just want you to drive through and use more electronic banking through the ATM or stuff like that. That industry is seeing a tectonic shift. And I understand that we're using less and less cash. I go for weeks, sometimes a month or more without a single cash bill on me. And everything from, debit, small payments to all the bills that are auto paid and things like that. It just seems like the whole financial world out there is changing. And I think that's putting a lot of stress on banks because they used to make a ton of their profits by all sorts of little fees and things. And I think people are getting tired of it and want alternatives. At least that's the way I kind of see it. John Preto, you had another thought?
Banks are dead. Long live crypto.
I'm not sure. Hey, people have said crypto might take over for it. I think it'll be a long time coming, but I can certainly see trusted organizations, and whether or not you trust an organization like Apple or Microsoft or anybody else, clearly, I think it doesn't take a genius to see the reason they've been spending so much time talking about privacy and security and people can't hack you and, we're not releasing information was in part a play to be trustworthy. And isn't that most of what your financial institution must be for you to make an inroad? So whoever gets there, there's a lot of money to be made in managing wealth around the world electronically. Next question.
Grab up those NFTs. Next question in from Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris is talking about the filmindependent.org. There's a link there to it. He wants to know, is doing an interesting hybrid schedule thoughts for film festivals going forward?
Film festival. Chris Widener is going to help us out here.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Day one of the forum is going to be at the Directors Guild of America. And, SAG Indy and the Directors Guild of America are sponsoring it. It's always interesting to me to see these things that have always been traditionally in person go more hybrid, but I wonder if we're really going to do a lot of film screenings virtually just because the chance for pirating them is a little higher. I didn't know if that's something that anybody on the panelists really had much of an input in. I was kind of hoping Courtney would be here today, but we're missing him. So,
yeah, it's been interesting. I've seen a lot of movement in this space. I mean, I never had to do a DCP until probably 8 or 9 years ago, and the fact that they changed over from the hard drive delivery to the more future-looking theaters. I mean, we went from literal film canisters being delivered to these kind of secure hard drives to DCPs now, which are housed potentially on that. There's just been a lot of technological change in the distribution of motion pictures. Plus, we know that once upon a time, to get into the filmmaking business, you had to invest a lot of money. I mean, the hardware was expensive. Big motion picture cameras were expensive. The workflow was complicated, and you need a lot of specialists. The bringing in of digital video and the fact that smaller cameras, lighter weight cameras, became less expensive, more accessible. The explosion I watched for over 10 years in terms of what are called resume films. It's a young filmmaker having an idea, wanting to execute it, going out and making their movie. I mean, we got major directors like Christopher Nolan and other people out of those kinds of processes where they would have had to go through the traditional, go find a film school and get the resources there and then find somebody who's willing to back you with large enough budgets to actually make a film, get prints made and distribute it. That kind of all went away. So, boy, a lot of changes in that space over the last 5 to 10 years. Mitchell, you had some thoughts too?
Yeah, you're going to see a device like this that plugs into their film system. This is a DX115, and it's basically a hard drive and a removable canister. And these things generally are the ones that they use to put their files on DCI files or DPA you were just mentioning.
DCPs, a digital cinema package, which is what the film, the exhibitor, I think they are called technically in the business, all the motion picture chains want it delivered in on that. At some point it's going to be networked and they're just going to be able to do anything. And in fact, Alex was excited about it. So I just went recently to a concert in my local theater, and some of these big operators like Dolby and other people are putting together this network where they can stream live real-time things into theaters, knowing that people want the kind of experience, but that artists, in this case it was a musical performer, don't want to have to go on the road and travel. So all of this, managing rights, getting the pipelines together so that you can have a really good experience of a performer in one place at a venue, being able to reach out into all the existing movie theaters and do a satisfying concert performance. in a distributed fashion like that seems to be something that we're heading towards. So it's interesting. It appears to be really early days, but we're getting there, and I think pretty fast. Let's move on to the next question.
Here's Douglas Carmichael with a question. With DaVinci Resolve coming to the iPad, including feature parity with the desktop, do you think that it will have a transformative effect on workflows in our industry? Will the next generation of professionals carry iPads on set and not MacBook Pros?
And John Preda is going to start us off.
We had to listen to Chris Fenwick yesterday scream at us about why iPads were so bad. And if you watch Chris, and I'm sure Bill, work on editing, all of their work is done on their keyboard, on their shortcuts. And so maybe the young guys coming up will use it. But this reminds me of a story where the guys doing Morse code on the Tonight Show were faster than the two little girls texting. So what does that tell you?
Chris Widener.
Well, and this Chris will probably have the exact opposite opinion of Chris yesterday. I actually have edited on LumaFusion on the iPad for quite a while. I'll start my edits there, and then I'll take it into Final Cut on a Mac. And so it's a workflow that I've been using for quite a long time. In fact, I was sitting at John Predo's kitchen table cutting stuff for the rocket launch back in March. And that was pretty easy to bring everything up and make it deliverable. So,
Tom Ferguson.
I think with a 12.9-inch screen and 2 terabytes max storage, as large as you can get, transformative effect on workflows, not quite yet.
Nigel?
I think you've got to think of the usage scenarios of the two different devices, and there'll always be some people who are outside the mainstream and use a device a different way for whatever reason. But if you think about your iPad as a lean back device, so you lean back when you tend to use it, it'll be great for viewing and looking at and checking. If you think of your laptop as a lean forward device, which is you lean into it and you type and you work, that sort of device is always going to be easier to do fast working on. So I think there's probably a role in the workflow for both of those, depending what you're doing. And then there'll always be somebody who is different.
Mitch Hill.
I don't think portability is the issue. I think having a comfortable dark room with the right lighting and the right monitor setup and a big keyboard and a trackpad and a whatever else you need still is very hard to beat with a iPad. I mean, it's convenient if you need to look at some proxies. If you're flying home and you want to do a rough edit, yeah, I guess I can see that. But really, the work gets done in this room right here.
So I'll take an editor who has gone through a few of these changes myself's approach and say, the thing that I think they're looking at with the iPad is something that I did about 4 years ago. I have friends who operate lumberjack systems, and they have a system where you can use an iPad in the field to pre-mark scenes in Final Cut. And I had a transformative experience. And what it was this. All I had to do was give an iPad to one of my assistants on a shoot we did in Florida. And her job was to hit start take. And then when the take was over, hit end. And then she had a list of pre-built keywords that she could tap on to apply them to that. That process and getting that metadata off the web, because it went up to the cloud, into the edit suite when I started working means that all of my material was pre-marked up, essentially pre-trimmed, if you want to look at it that way, so that I didn't have to waste any time messing with the stuff that was no good. That alone was a monstrous productivity boost. And that's where I see these tools like the iPad. It's not that you're going to try to do everything you can do at your desk as an editor in the field, although with a laptop running, you can certainly do that if that is your choice. But to have these extra tools, whether it's whether it's an iPad or a phone, because remember, I can do that with my assistant in the field, but I can also give it to the producer and give it to somebody else, and their metadata, their opinions of what happens can flow into this process as well. So I know not only what I liked, but what they liked, which in a long, complicated, difficult process, like maybe documentary filmmaking, you're just dealing with so much input, so many possible sources. The fact that you can winnow that down to the most important is incredibly powerful. So that's where I see these tools. I mean, it's not going to be your only editor, but it's, I think, going to be a necessary adjunct to editing going forward as you learn the power and efficiency of these tools. And I think it'll happen for all the editors. I don't think it's just a Final Cut thing. I would think that eventually Avid and Premiere and everything else will continually move in this direction, particularly with what they're doing in camera to cloud on the Adobe side and things like that. All of these things, and with Frame.io, all of these things will get together so that you get more useful data earlier in the production process, and you don't wait until you get into the edit suite to effectively start to manage all this stuff that's flooding in. Those are my 2 cents. Let's go on to the next question.
And Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas is here asking, the Wyze Gen 3 camera has 2 USB connectors, okay? Can you connect it as a webcam via USB to Mac, PC, or Linux machine?
Mitchell, tell us.
I don't know, but hold the presses. Wasn't it Keenan that said earlier today there's a $10,000 bounty right now somewhere out there in a treasure hunt at a Wyze camera?
You were talking about that, Keenan. Where did Keenan go? Is Keenan
maybe
has...
Predo knows.
Oh, there, Keenan is coming back. Keenan,
what's up with the big $10,000 game?
All right, so Wyze camera apparently has hidden. Jonas is showing it right now. There's a live stream, and they're releasing clues on their website. And if you find the location of this item somewhere in the continental United States, that's all we know. It's on private property, so you have to email them and say, "Hey, we found this Latin long. This is where we think it is." They'll give you permission to go dig it up. There's a safe buried with a Wyze camera that, if you have the code to the safe, which they're giving clues for that too, it's a great marketing tool. This has really got people talking about it. Jonas has been doing, investigations trying to determine the location. It's a great marketing tool, but it's a fun thing. We were looking at it last night, and it's $10,000. So I'm sure somebody can put the link in chat. I don't have the link to it, but yeah, Wyze camera, and they're based up in Seattle. They were Amazon engineers that founded the company, and a lot of our guys with Garage Rocketeers own their cameras, so that's how they found out about this thing. But it's pretty cool. It looks to be a fun marketing treasure hunt for the whole country.
Hey, if you saw that and said, "Hey, that's 2 blocks from where I live, I know that place," please go into Makana right now and tell the rest of us.
Yes, right. and I'm sure Predo will give you a finder's fee. So
there you go. Mitchell came back in again. Mitchell, get another thought.
I was just going to say, unfortunately, offering that money distracts us from the real features of the camera. I'm more interested in finding that money. And I'm telling you, as a former radio host, where we did contests, which were treasure hunts, it all ends in tears eventually, because people's houses get disrupted, property gets disrupted, holes are dug in places where they shouldn't be and not refilled. It can be a total disaster. I hope it works out for them, and I wouldn't mind a piece of that cash.
Why is it that I'm reminded of Reddit threads where I found a safe, and they get like 10 million people trying to figure out what's in the safe, and inevitably they open the safe and it's empty. Oh, well, neither here nor there.
That's the Geraldo Rivera effect.
Go. Let's go to the next question.
Okay, we never answered the question, but it's unfortunately I'm so distracted about that money. Graham Codwell from Belfast, Northern Ireland. I've just taken delivery of a 20-foot mast for my sports video. It came with 3 sandbags for stability. What would you recommend for filling them, and at what size, if appropriate? I feel sand and the Northern Ireland climate might not be a great match.
Chris Widener's going to help you a little bit.
A very popular thing to put in is pea gravel, small rocks. I actually prefer very small chromium steel ball bearings. You really don't want to go with lead because it tends to turn into dust, and lead dust all over is kind of a problem. And sand tends to clump when it gets wet, and you never know what you're going to run into when you're out on the shoot. So,
Mitchell?
Yeah, and we were talking the other day, the beach sand is not appropriate because it has living organisms in it, and it gets stinky after a few days. So you don't want to go that route. Thumbs up to what Chris just said about lead. It can be a problem. It is a neurotoxin. You don't need that in your sandbags. So put sand in them, or some kind of coated shock that will solve the problem. It's again, you got to go into a hardware store, and I I need 30 pounds of shotgun shot. It's a tough one.
My history solution has always been the pea gravel that was mentioned, but I put another layer in there. Typically, if you buy those saddlebag type weight bags, which I highly recommend because they're really useful, they usually have a strap on them, so it's easy to drop them on a camera leg or a tripod leg or pick them up easily. So I've got about maybe 15 in my collection, but they also have an interior zipper system and often a double zipper system for the people who do use things like sand so that they're pretty stable. And then I go a step farther. I go out and buy gallon Ziploc bags, and I put the pea gravel in the gallon Ziploc bags, which have been put inside those holders in there to make sure that even should something sharp run across that sandbag, there's multiple layers of protection there so you don't end up dumping whatever you did all over your set and driving everybody crazy. So my solution is Ziploc bags and pea gravel in an official sandbag structure. Chris Widener, you had another thought?
Well, I had actually forgotten. For heavier stuff, I've used the water weights. You can get them that'll strap down to tripods, and that's really nice because when you're done, you just drain the water and you don't have to transport stuff.
I've done the same thing. It's a lot easier flying with plastic jugs or water bladders than it is traveling with sand. Trust me. Next question.
From Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Paul asks, is there an off-the-shelf shelf about 6 feet wide that I could place monitors on and would have several rows for atems, USB hubs, power supplies, etc., or do I need to make my own? And I make my own suggestions. And if I make my own suggestions, I got it.
Mitch, you're going to take on this one. Go ahead.
We were just talking to Brandon on our back end about a solution like this. And if you go to your local Home Depot, they have a nice shelf there for about $300. It's called the Husky, and it comes in various sizes. It's really pretty. It's got like a butcher block top on it. It's got that size, among others, and you can crank it up and down, so you can adjust the level depending on where you are in the scene. So I recommend getting it pre-built and pre-made.
There's also one other suggestion I'll give you, which is to look in some of the broadcast supply houses and look under the term monitor bridge, because a lot of people make a specific kind of bridge designed to put monitors or small, raise them over a desk. Some of the bespoke editing consoles from places like Middle Atlantic, and there are plenty of other places out there, have that. In fact, I'm sitting at one right now where the desk surface is at one level and then the monitor bridge is anywhere from 8 to 12 to 14 inches above that, giving you a place to put monitors, because that's really kind of what it was for. And so they've solved this problem. So there's a lot of ways to do it. And you can certainly do it with a super light block and a board if you want to. It's whatever works for you. Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael is here. If Apple introduces a macOS on the iPad powered by the M-series processor, what niche might it occupy in comparison to the MacBook Pro?
And we're going to start with Chris Widener and go to Serge and Nigel after that. Chris, take it away.
Well, if you're talking about the 12.9-inch spec'd out with 2 terabyte of storage, it would have 16 gig of RAM. So it would be pretty equivalent, if not a little bit superior. You definitely have a weight savings. The only real drawback would be the lack of interfaces. But if you're using a dock or anything else to break out those connectors, which unfortunately most of us that deal with the iPads have, it really wouldn't be that big a deal.
Serge?
I think going back to the 12-inch MacBook Pro, I think it's going to be a comparison to the MacBook Air. It's not going to be the level at the MacBook Pro. Remember that you won't have a fan, so the CPU will overheat easily, and the power, the heating of the iPad is not scheduled to manage that. So reduce your expectation. I think it's the best way to think about it.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think you should consider that the announcement that they're doing it is maybe not really an announcement. They probably tried to do everything with everything and play with everything. So the fact that they've made it work doesn't mean they're going to announce it as a product. So I think we may be way off that. The uses, should they do it, I think it would be a very interesting development machine for people to testing stuff. So if you already had an iPad and you want to do Mac stuff, it may be a way to test some of it. I find the whole MacBook and Mac line very confusing and very messed up at the moment. So I think it's really hard to follow. If it challenged anything, it would challenge the low-end 12 or 14-inch MacBook Pro, but it might end up being more expensive than that. And again, the MacBook Pro will have Thunderbolt ports on it. So it's really hard, I think, at the moment to really understand between M1 and M2 what their strategy across all of these products are. I think it's probably take another year for that to roll out. It'll be more obvious at that point.
John Preto.
The gentleman from Austin nailed it. I'm waiting for the fold-up iPad with the desktop OS on. It'd be really cool, just like the tablets that they had in Westworld. They all had the little fold-up tablet that they put in their lab coat. That would be awesome form factor.
Peter Sargent.
My bad. I'll just pile on to what Chris said. The one thing to worry about is connectivity. I mean, the iPad itself and the M1 itself only essentially has, I know you can get 2 Thunderbolt ports on an M1 Mac Mini, but in fact, it has one M1 piece on Thunderbolt pad on the chip, whereas the M1 Pro, M1 Extreme, Ultra, and the M2s all have multiple channels for Thunderbolt. And so it's going to force it back down to I would bet it would, if anything, it would overlap nicely with the 13-inch MacBook Pro. The one that's based on the M1. The one that's based on the M1 itself.
Yeah. Obviously, the processors are going in the direction of giving incredible power to lighter and smaller and easier devices. The thing that, to me, and I've taken 2 big turns on this. I thought, I'm never going to do anything serious on my iPad because I can't really type on it. Yes, I can add a Bluetooth keyboard, but they've never been really satisfying to me. And why wouldn't I just use my laptop if I'm going to do that? But then the last few times, actually 2 or 3 times, I've seen a young person whip out an iPad and touch type as if they had been typing on that their whole life. And they probably had. I've seen it with people who put it on a table and type with 2 hands, like on a regular keyboard. I've also seen young men and young women doing single finger typing and reaching like 90 words a minute speeds on that because that's what they've been doing their whole life. And for them, that's probably easier than the other typing they do, which is their thumbs on a phone. So they are adapting to these input devices in a way that I have not, and I probably never will. I like a full-size keyboard. I also like one with a trackpad because when I'm in the zone editing, I don't want to move my hands anywhere, even to go up and tap on an iPad and use any touch interfaces. But that's me, my conditioning, and how I've learned to work. I do think the new generation coming up who's had these other tools for a much longer time and have kind of put in their brains how to function in 2-hand and even 1-hand modes might change that for the generation coming. It'll be interesting to see. Peter Sargent, you had some more thoughts?
I'll just emphasize, I mean, I've watched my grandchildren, the oldest, which is 16, but the 12-year-old in particular, all she knows is iPad, right? That's all she, and she's been navigating that since she was 4. So, put her in front of a keyboard, she's lost, but put her on an iPad with a keyboard, she's fine.
Yeah. They talk about digital natives, and we have a generation or 2 of them now that have had these tools since they crawled.
So-called Gen Alpha.
Yeah. Chris Widener.
Well, Guy mentioned something in the chat that I found very interesting. He said the iPad can have built-in cellular. So I actually went through and priced out a 12.9-inch iPad Pro with 2 terabyte and a 13-inch MacBook Pro to see what the difference in specs would be. And if you got the iPad Pro with cellular, it would be $180 more than the MacBook Pro. But as far as the processor, RAM, and storage, they'd be exactly the same. So it would really come down to the discussion in my mind of if having that cellular connectivity, but lack of ports, would be that important. So that is an interesting question.
It is. And there's so many different kinds of users that the thing I'm trying to force myself to do is not think that everybody is like me, because they're not. They have different experiences, different capacities, different workflows. Serge, you had thought?
Again, the MacBook Air will do the job. And the cellular connection, for me, it's not a big issue because now we have auto hotspot. I don't even consider a cellular iPad anymore because the automatic connection to my cell phone is so fast, I don't mind it.
Okay. The fun discussion. And it's interesting to see how this is going. The world continues to change. Let's go to the next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas has a question. Handles will be rolling out soon, and I don't mean breaker 19. Your YouTube is doing this, and this is at all consequential?
Jonas, help us. It's good to see your face in here.
So it's really interesting what YouTube is doing, and to understand what they're doing, you need to look at how you can tag people right now. Right now, you can do and whatever weird random name they decided they want to have for their short URL. As soon as they had their 100 subscribers, you need to use that. So in the past, we've seen a lot of big channels being able to get a little bit of a better treatment and be able to change the name from random name 123 to just random name, as an example, as they grew. Handles basically replace that short form. So that is being rolling out right now. You get an email for every single channel that you have. First, an announcement, and depending on the size of your channel, it seems like a rollout from the top down, which basically gives everyone with a larger audience a fair advantage to get your name. So, for example, for one of the channels that we manage, we were able to score our name without any edit numbers or any domain TLDs, all the things that you need to do sometimes because someone else already has it. So it's just it's a re-ramp of that, but the good thing is it's not disruptive. You still get to keep your own old channel short links, your old channel URLs, and in the future you can go to YouTube channels with youtube.com/@ and a handle, and that's the big change, and we'll see how it plays out.
That is fascinating. And thank you for that rundown. This is something that wasn't on my radar. And I can see that for a lot of content creators all over the world, it sounds like there's going to be another little land rush here. And if you get ahead of it, you might have better results than if you wait another year to get involved in that. So thank you, Jonas. That was fabulous. Let's move to the next question.
From Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois, Kyle asked, Obsbot 360 link question, with the HDMI adapter and remote control, is it still more cost-effective than a traditional point pan-tilt zoom camera that already is built for live video?
Jonas is going to start us, then Chris Widener, then Tom. So Jonas, take it away.
It really depends on how you define cost-effective. One thing to keep in mind is this is still a really tiny thing, and you're now using HDMI and a remote. You don't get to use it with a joystick. You don't get to use it with the software anymore if you use the HDMI controller, depending on the implementation of that. Is it worth your money for small kids? Probably. Is it worth your money to do like a full live production on? I would probably go to the tried and tested PT sets that are more expensive, but also have a better quality of motion, better handling experience, and especially like a better picture quality. And one thing to also keep in mind with labor shortages like we have it right now is you might be able to easily get a PT set operator that knows how to do a Panasonic UE150. The Canons are coming in real good, so you'll also get someone who knows to control those or control any PT set camera that has like the typical Whisker protocol. If you give them a remote that looks like their TV remote and tell them, yeah, you do the show now, you might have issues getting labor for that job more than as they need to be retrained for that specific model. So I would stay for productions with the ones that we already have. And this is a great option for small desk setups. I have one for our kids, but not for production really.
That's interesting, Jonas. Are you saying, so essentially the feel of a operator for a particular camera changes from camera model to camera model, and you will, if you're a Panasonic operator?
Great operators even can tell you like the difference if we connect them over a TCP versus like an HTTP connection, because they notice the lag because they're so accustomed to just having it as an extension. But also it's like the remote for the Obsbot is like a remote, like a TV remote. It's not a joystick. So it's like a button press versus like you can really, with a joystick, you can like have a scale from like how fast you want to move. With a button, it's a button press. So that also is something to keep in mind with the quality of motion.
Interesting, fascinating. Chris Widener has some thoughts.
And yeah, I completely agree with that. It really depends on whether it fits into your workflow or not. The whole system, if you're only doing 1080, the Obsbot that does 1080 for all three elements you need is only $350. So it would be fairly cost effective. But yeah, it really comes down to whether it's going to fit in the workflow you're using and whether the camera sensor is going to be enough for what you're trying. So
makes sense. Tom Ferguson.
And once again, I'll just remind you that the Obsbot camera remote works just fine. If you're using the Insta360 link, no, that doesn't go through this device.
Fair enough. Warning distributed. Let's go to the next question.
Serge Blondin from Montreal, Canada, and here on our panel, talking distribution. What is your preferred way for maximum quality of getting movies streaming, Disney Plus, Apple TV, etc., or Blu-ray or CATV satellite?
Let's start with Nigel and go to Mitchell. So Nigel, go ahead.
So my preferred way is through my Apple TV and my home. If we're putting a home theater in, we might go to a Blu-ray player, particularly an HD one or a 4K one, or even up to something like a kaleidoscope, and you can go up from there. But I think it's, for most homes, Apple TV is going to cover most of what you need nowadays.
Moving to Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Nigel. A friend of mine who works at Magnolia at Best Buy says that 90% of the flat panel TVs that they install via the Geek Squad are done with Apple TV as the main system. And I've been a customer of DirecTV since 1994. That's almost 30, I guess it's about 30 years now. And I'm getting very fed up with their process and their pricing and the quality of the video that's coming down to me. And yet Apple maintains a great gateway to all these other services. Plus, I love the fact that I can go to my iPhone and I can see what I'm subscribing to, and I can cancel something right there, right then, very easily. So Apple TV is my vote. I think a lot of the old systems are forcing people to start making decisions financially and otherwise.
Pete Sargent.
I think it really depends on the. I will often watch it for the first time on my Apple TV. And then if it's something I want to keep, like I think Courtney and I talked about Lawrence of Arabia a while back. That one I went ahead and got it on Blu-ray just because I didn't want the compression on some of the video artifacts. But I also point out for those of us with grandkids, sometimes a Blu-ray player is handy because they want to watch the same movie over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I've known a lot of people in that category. Tom.
Well, the Apple TV is the main hub, of course, but it has a number of apps, and it allows me to get to my Tableau for live programming, and then my Plex server for whatever else I want to watch that I want to watch over and over and over again.
Fair enough. Next question.
Jack Cannon, Phoenix, Arizona, asked, been waiting for Infobee to be released for the Mac despite having to use my PC for this. Any updates, Jonas?
Well, who could answer that? Oh, wait, Jonas is on the panel. Jonas, tell us.
So it's quite funny because while we released it last time, we got all the setup from Apple, and there is a released Mac M1 or Mac ARM version and a Mac Intel version now. And for those that don't know what Infobee is, it's this little program that you can drag your files into that then gives you all the metadata, but also does some quick checks, sanity checks on them to figure out if there's any black frames, if there's extended silence. It gives you the waveform for every channel. So if you do crazy stuff in like 16 channel, 5.1, 5.12 channel layouts, it will tell you that. It will also tell you the channel layout here. And then it will tell you the times where you have like silences, where you have black frames, where you have freeze frames. We use it a lot to like also prove our workflow. So what you do is you send a known good video into your workflow, let it run for hours and hours, and then let Infobee go over it and let you tell, after 2 hours you had a quick outage, after 5 hours you had a freeze, audio stopped at 6 hours, and then you can look into that.
That's awesome. Where is that available? Is that on the App Store?
It's not on the App Store. It's on our own camera website, and I'll put the link into the chat.
Absolutely. Put a link into the chat for everybody. And Mitchell, you had another thought?
Yeah, +1 on the Jonas's product there. It's superb, and I've been using the beta version on my M1 Mac with no problems. So great work, Jonas.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next question.
Chad Lafarge in Columbia, Missouri. Is there a utility I can use on a MacBook Pro to document memory usage by a specific application over time?
I don't know about keeping it over time. The activity monitor will talk to you about memory usage, but I don't think it tracks it over time. So I'm not sure if I know of a tool. I'm sure in the developer tools, there must be something to do this. I am not a developer and I don't have access to that. So maybe we're just, we need somebody a little more technical. Maybe when Alex gets back, because he does a lot of work on the Mac, he will have some insight into this, but it looks like we're going to have a swing and a miss on this one. Sorry about that, Chad. Let's go to the next question.
From Guy Cochran in Seattle, USA. On the Mac, what do you use to figure out a video file's bitrate?
Let's start with Jonas and go to John and then Mitchell. Jonas?
I think there was a little bit of a softball hinting at Infobee. It gives you your bitrate. And the interesting thing with bitrate is how do you measure it? Because often there's variable bitrate and constant bitrate. And that's one of the things that we're still working out on, like what information is useful there. It's like, do you need a graph of like how the bitrate fluctuates over scene detection based. And it gets more and more interesting as we move into these new codecs with the new NVIDIA cards now having AV1 and AV2 coders, all the crazy Apple stuff that they include on their chips. Bitrate is becoming less and less of like a, this is the bitrate, and more like, hey, tell me your codec profile and bitrate setting.
Yeah, maybe what are the parameters of the bit rate over the course of the whole file? How fast? And yeah, it's just crazy. John Preto, you had a thought.
I was the first one to buy Playout B and Office Hours. I was the first one to buy Infobee, I think, Jonas, right? And I used to use Invisor, and I was the one that yelled at Jonas to get the Mac version running. He had it done that same day.
Crazy. Mitch.
Well, if Preto was number 1, I was number 2. Obviously, Infobee. In full disclosure, I paid for my copy of it. I didn't get it offered to me for free.
I paid for both of mine.
Okay.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes left for the top of the hour, a little less than 3 minutes. So we're going to give you one more question and take it away.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas is back. Any fast-track way to make and store clips locally from YouTube videos?
Chris Widener will start us out.
Based on a recommendation from Alex, I had bought a program called Downy. If you're looking to make clips, that's kind of the easiest way to grab the videos and then throw it into any NLE and go to town.
Yeah, I use Downy as well. It's a good program. Jonas?
You could use YouTube Downloader or one of their command line versions. It does allow you to have an in and out point, and you can also do a screen scrape and just scrape that.
Yeah, those all work. John Preto?
Until Download B comes out, I still use Downy. And Downy works not only for YouTube, but it also works on Facebook as well. So I use it all the time.
Okay. I think that takes care of everything for the first hour. Thank you all for participating. Thank everybody who put in questions today in the Mukana system. And remember, if you'd like to do that, if you'd like to participate on the show by asking questions, it's a pretty easy process. Go to the officehours.global website and you should find instructions there for wending your way into the kind of the insiders club where you get to work with the Mukana system, have a chat during the show. And boy, I was just looking at that. Looks like the chat over in Mukana today has been very active. A lot of people had a lot of things to talk about. So that and our Discord are areas that you should examine as you go forward in your office hours experience. All right, I'm padding a little bit because I wanted to get closer to the top of the hour to make sure that we were starting just about right time. But I think I'm going to go ahead and welcome our special guest today. As we noted, we have Keenan Campbell with us, who's an old friend of ours, been around office hours for months and months and months and months. And when he came in, he was doing emergency management services in the great state of Illinois. And had some of the more interesting inserts in our show back in those days, where he would come in from the middle of nowhere, sitting in his truck at an intersection in the middle of a snowstorm, doing essentially watching over the citizens of his area to make sure they didn't get stuck in snow drifts or otherwise find intersections clogged that they needed to get past. So, Keenan, great to have you here. Can you tell us what you've been doing lately?
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. And it's been, I don't know, a couple of years since Alex said, turn your camera on. We'll bring you to the panel. And I was on a Portal TV and turned it on and didn't turn my camera on and talked to you guys in a black screen. That was my first office hours panel experience. So we've came a long way since then. I retired from the county after 27 years of public service and 8 years as an emergency manager. I thought, you know what, I don't really like cold weather. So John Preto said, hey, Las Vegas, Nevada is really nice. You should come here. Plus, I like shooting rockets in the desert from our Garage Rocketeers, our OH space program. So I did that. And then I had formed a company called the Disaster Group. So there's a big bridge between being prepared and, teaching your citizens to be prepared, but corporations need this work and private citizens, houses of worship, all of that. So the Disaster Group kind of came into existence just as the brainchild of office hours, that there's a need to fill. We need to fill this gap in. And let me see if I can switch my screen. So there's our little shameless plug. And if I can make all this technology work, I should be able to.
Looks good.
Yeah. So let me, kind of talk about me a little bit. I spent 22 years as a volunteer firefighter, emergency medical technician. I spent 8 years designing advanced power generation systems for Humvees, Strykers, Abrams, military trucks. And I was 8 years as the director of Bureau County Emergency Management, as you said, in Illinois. That also afforded me the membership of the Illinois Terrorism Task Force. So we were an incident management team. So we would come out when a local jurisdiction needed more assistance with incident command, and we would help them. And we also formed the Northwest Illinois Incident Management Assistance Team. So the idea here is things you guys do on productions are things that we have to build on the fly. So production's actually easier because you have time to fax it out, figure it out, meet with the venues and things like that. In a disaster situation, I literally have to bring everything in, from guys knowing how to make network cables. So, I mean, we take that for granted, but when there's a tornado, fire, flood, hazmat scene, we're bringing in the routers, switches, cameras, we have to literally bring the infrastructure that either existed at one point and was destroyed, or the infrastructure didn't exist and we're building a camp. So any of our folks that were in the military, they would understand the term camp, where you're building tents everywhere. And now you have to run network cables, access points, all that stuff. So we prepackaged some of these caches to build this infrastructure where none exists or where it was severely damaged and destroyed, all the way to tower trailers. So cell phones work on towers. So we have trailers that are 55-foot towers that go up in the air to restore two-way radio communication. So Preto and I kind of talked about this, and we thought this would be a kind of a good second hour just to talk about the doom and gloom as it relates to, the emergency side, but production side. So, because we have a huge amount of resources available to us, but it's things that don't happen overnight. So
it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about the maybe one of the bigger things that you had to deal with, and how that differed to maybe one of the smaller things that might be more on a scale that we would find in a independent kind of production. Do you have lessons from a big problem or a big effort to get ready for a problem?
So many of you would have heard of the Washington, Illinois tornado. It was in November, which is not historically the same time that a tornado would happen in the Midwest. Normally you think of that in the spring. So November, a tornado struck, leveled a town, continued on. It went through the state. So our team came in and we went to the county emergency operations center. So that's the nerve center of the county. only to find out they had no computers, no network, their internet was DSL. So now you put 30 people in a room all trying to send emails, make phone calls. It doesn't work. I found out they had fiber. It had never been turned on. So I was the logistics section chief. So logistics, we all know logistics is the art of finding stuff. So all these positions, operations, logistics, finance, they all come together in one room in the emergency operations center. My first night there, they had nowhere for us to sleep. I ended up sleeping in a sleeping bag on a floor in one of the offices. The next morning, we're trying to get internet, and we didn't have printers. They had no printers in their emergency operations center. So we brought in computers, printers, network, phones. Our equipment is all Pelican cases. So like media production, emergency management is Pelican cases. I at one point, I think I had 27 Pelican cases in one trailer. It's just, you have to bring it all in. So that disaster was horrible. And we got the fiber on, we started doing our work. And the next day I woke up and went outside and realized that the temperature had went from 70 degrees to 22 degrees. And I didn't have a winter coat. So the logistics chief was very ill prepared and didn't bring a winter coat on the deployment. That was rectified. And I never, ever forgot my winter coat, no matter what time of year it was. But little things like that we don't think about, that, you know, what you guys have it easier because we are doing pre-site visits. We're looking at the venue, you know, where your internet can be ordered from. You've tested it. With us, there's no test. There's no test for any of this because everything is gone, or we have to assume that literally everything is gone. So that was the kind of the biggest one we've been on. We were deployed to an Amazon warehouse that collapsed in Edwardsville, Illinois. Luckily, a lot of times we work out of command buses, big RVs that are pretty well equipped, but we always have to augment those pieces of equipment because an incident starts small and it expands or contracts. So as the days go on, the incident could have more people, less people, same as your production. You know, as you ramp up, you're going to have a lot more staff to worry about. As you get to the end of the days, you're starting to cut PAs and cut staff and bring them back to a level of small. So we literally use these processes with everything we do every day, from the smallest incident to the largest. It's just a matter of, and I've taught emergency management for many years. And the thing that I always say is it's all about people and stuff. Do I need more people to do the job? Do I need more stuff for those people to do the job? So TV production and emergency management are pretty much the same type of organized chaos at many, many times. For all of you guys that have been doing it for a long time, you know that it's 2 minutes before the show starts and something's going to go wrong. So we just try to mitigate that. And that's what the point of today is to talk about some of those mitigation strategies.
Is there something on the micro level where you just ran across a small problem and said, I really have to be agile and address this weird little thing that is not a huge deal, but it's still important to take care of? So we do some different examples here. So I built this. This is a Pelican. I would call it a gun safe because it's really small. It has a cheap TP-Link router. We use AT&T FirstNet. So everybody that's heard of FirstNet, it's the public safety broadband network. So that route, it has an HPUE, which is a high-powered unit. It's neat because they move the radio transmitter to the roof. So you're not putting that RF near someone's face. The cradle point routers, the transmitter is inside the router. With this HPUE, that transmitter can be outside. So this is kind of my grab and go. It's a simple network router. It's got a little switch. This is just to get you LTE connections from a smaller case. It's not meant to be very mission critical. It's more of, I don't have anything, get me something. We can run that case. And then we can go to the bigger ones. This is a cradle point router on the right. It's got its own battery pack, inverter. It has AT&T FirstNet and Verizon, a network switch again with PoE, and it has 2 IP phones. The neat thing with this case that we designed, it has a platform for a laptop. So one person can run this whole operation. You have 2 phones with 2 SIP phone numbers. There's no infrastructure needed. It'll do Verizon or FirstNet, and everything is self-contained. So that kind of gives us, that's the starting, hey, you just need internet and a couple telephones. That's what we're going to do. So very cool. Well, let's dive into questions because we have a lot of people backed up who are interested in this topic. So, Mitch, what do we got first here?
First question is coming in from Sean Dunn in wherever Sean is. What strategy should be used to assess risk for production?
Keenan, do you have a process you go through?
So we have what we call a THIRA, a threat, hazard, incident, risk assessment. It's a really cool fillable PDF. So when we look at risk, there's several ways we think about it. High consequence, low occurrence. So a high consequence, low occurrence would be an active shooter. If that happens, high consequence, but the chances of it happening are low occurrence. Then a winter storm, we'll call that a high consequence, high occurrence, because we know that a winter storm is going to be rated higher day to day. Severe storms. Somebody always asked me when I was an emergency manager, what keeps me up at night? Severe weather. That's the one thing that none of us can control. We can certainly try to plan for it, but if the infrastructure is damaged by a tornado, a hurricane, we have so many different processes when we're dealing with natural disasters that the high consequence, low occurrence are the ones that we don't focus on. It's the high consequence or the medium consequence. And I can provide that THIRA to anybody that wants to see that. We'll have a bunch of documentation.
Very cool. Let's go to the next question.
And it's from John Preto in Las Vegas, Nevada. When should you consider having on-site security?
Keenan?
So security for us, when I was with the county, was always the SWAT teams or law enforcement. We would have pretty good security. Your mileage will vary on that. That's a hard question to answer because a lot of times venues have physical security. If you're going to leave equipment overnight, somebody needs to be there. Somebody needs to be at that site 24/7, especially if it's an outdoor venue. If you can't physically lock a door, I would always say we need physical security. There's just no other way around it. So if we're looking at the situation, again, your mileage will vary on that. But anytime you have that, we always say the hairs on the back of our neck. If you feel like it's in a bad neighborhood, you don't feel the venue's providing security, there are so many private contractors out there, even armed private contractors that can do that service for you. It needs to be put into your quote worksheet.
Yeah, we used to use a lot of private security. I used to run a charity beer festival, and we always had a large presence of private hired security. Plus, since we were dealing with people who might be drinking, will be drinking, at least tasting, we added off-duty actual sworn law enforcement officers from the municipality there and paid them as off-duty security as well. That's usually a contract or a connection that you can make through your local police department, and they love getting that overtime work. And so, the private security can handle things up to a certain level, but it was always made me feel really good to have official sworn law enforcement officers on site when I had some kind of risk like that. So,
well, and the neat thing with off-duty, they're still a law enforcement officer for that jurisdiction.
Absolutely.
So even you use the term off duty, but they still have powers of arrest. They can take care of anything that needs to be done. For example, our county fair was all undercover off duty deputies that we hired through the fair board to make sure that. So yeah, if you can reach out to your local law enforcement, a lot of times they'll offer you extra patrols. If it's a high consequence venue, so the Super Bowl, they're already in the comment thread with county emergency management, with NFL productions. Everybody's already talking about the security needs of the venue because it's a high value target. That's the other thing. So if we're dealing with productions on a high value target, the county's involved, the state, the feds, even on the Super Bowl, the FBI is there, the bomb dogs, all of that stuff is already there. So on your production, make sure you're pinging in those groups. If you're that small to medium, local law enforcement exists to protect the public, restore order, all of that. So that's a great point, Bill, that maybe we need to ping in our local law enforcement before we do private security and see if there is an opportunity for them to be paid to patrol.
Absolutely. I wanted a guy with a radio who could go, Sergeant, we got trouble. And you just know there's no phone call. There's no anybody answering it. That's going to get their attention instantly. And I thought that was always worth the extra money it took. Plus, it was great to just give those guys extra work. They're, not the highest paid people on the planet. Let's go to the next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana asked, how many layers of redundancy is enough? My PepLink setup is 4 layers deep.
And Keenan, do you want to do it before Jonas does, or let's get to Jonas first and then have Keenan finish? So let's do Jonas first.
One of my biggest grievances when we build the redundancies is that a lot of times you hear people talk about primary and backup. We try really hard to call it primary, secondary, and then you go on because it never stops. And the more important it gets, the more you can add. Then it's also often a amount of price. And like Keenan said, you do your risk assessment and how possible is it that this happens? If it's not that likely, but your company is going to go bankrupt, if it happens, I might as well add another layer of protection. And often it's not about layers of redundancy, but also redundant points, like have a full flow diagram and test. Like if you have 5 layers of redundancy that are never tested, that doesn't help you as much as if you have 2 redundant layers and doing the rehearsal, suddenly someone screams failover and the whole team does a failover just as a test. That's one of the things that we do in our large productions. The whole team is tried and tested on failovers. We use a similar method than Netflix, where you just shut down an instance or you make something not available and everyone has to deal with it. And that makes people be prepared.
Keenan, do you want to sneak in before Chris finishes us up?
So we call it in the US primary, secondary, and tertiary. So at least 3 for those. But then when I'm building stuff, I tell everybody I need a backup for the backup's backup. So if you don't have 3 or 4 layers deep, we're already have a problem. In a disaster situation, you're dealing with what LTE carriers can we get? The live view systems are coming a long way where you can bond multiple cellular carriers. Chris uses PEP waves or PEP links. I've stuck with Cradlepoint routers, which are 2, but then I've went to the Sierra Wireless MG90s because they allow 4 SIM cards that can all be active at the same time. Where the Cradlepoint is a 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 1 off. The Sierras allow you to have all 4 in a state of readiness, and then you can do VLANs and route things to different carriers. So when we did OH Space, we had 2 separate network switches. One was on LTE fed by Verizon and AT&T, and the other switch was on Starlink. And then we had a 3rd Starlink that was in reserve for other use. So we actually ran that on 2 Starlinks and 2 different LTE connections, and the networks were segregated. So the kids that were out there, people needed their cell phones, they were on LTE from our Ubiquity link, and then production was on Starlink. So the only thing on one Starlink was the live feed out. That's it. So we've kind of segregated our production and said, okay, well, rather than having 4 layers of redundancy, let's split off the load and put the kids that are watching Netflix on LTE, your cell phone calls on LTE, your text messages, and then leave production on Starlink. Oh, and then have a backup Starlink in case the first one isn't working right. So that's kind of how we've looked at layered redundancy. If you can shed the load and then, yeah, there's always the option that something's going to fail. We know that. But by moving things away, we weren't worried about a kid getting on YouTube and bringing down the Starlink network because he's sitting there streaming. So you can build your workflows with those redundancies already active.
Let's go to Chris Widener. Chris?
Well, it's always an interesting conversation to me. I really do like the PepLink equipment. It's conversations that Keenan and I have had quite often because as an emergency manager, he was professionally paranoid, primarily as IT and video. I'm more of a hobbyist paranoid, if you want to say it that way. But I've always been a big believer in multiple data paths out. So a lot of the installations I've done with PepLink, you have a primary internet connection, a secondary here in Indiana, at least with a WISP, a wireless ISP, and then backups to Verizon and AT&T as the 3rd and 4th fallbacks. So it's always interesting to me, the testing of that and how that system kind of responds and what the carriers will give you as far as data on a day-to-day basis. It's one of the things when I'm doing live production, especially, you really have to test kind of at the same time of day and even the same day of the week to make sure you're going to have the right kind of cellular, at least in the Midwest, because internet can be interesting when you're in the middle of a cornfield. So.
I think I mentioned we had an intern in one of my offices he wanted to be a reporter. So he used to listen and he heard a quote and he'd write it on a napkin and post it in the break room. And I'm a hobbyist paranoid, would have ended up on that wall. I guarantee it. That's brilliant. Pete Sargent next.
Well, the one thing I always worry about in this place, because so Keenan, I had to do part of what you do for Hurricane Ike back in 2008. And our biggest problem was not connectivity, it was power, right? We had to have multiple power sources that could each back each other up because, without power, none of this works. None of it works. And so I had to get badges so we get past the guards, past security, because all the interstates were on leave Galveston Island, and we had to go to Galveston Island.
Jonas, you want to make another comment before we switch over to the next question?
Yeah, and one thing to always keep in mind is we're not only talking about redundancy in the show has to be 100% the same when you file over to your tertiary or like the fourth backup. It might just be a phone streaming out through Larry's broadcaster over SLT. Like, what is the core that you for sure need to have still working? I always have a phone that could be ready to stream to YouTube at any point. There's also the point of like, do we just record it and stream it later? But it's one important thing to also look at, what does my tertiary backup need to provide? Do we need the full show, or where can we say like, if we don't have that graphic, that's fine. So let's not have that graphic on the third tertiary backup. Because everything that you do add, you do need to test. So if you have 4 backups with the full production and you only test the first 2 because it's so much to test now, you might as well have a not as full-fledged backup in the third and fourth backups.
Keenan, you want to finish us up? But we are running a little bit long now. Suddenly, we've got a lot of questions for you. People are really interested in this.
So to Peter's question about power, we're going to answer it later in the show. And Jonas is the friend we don't deserve. Just want to say that.
We have such expertise here. It's fabulous. Next question.
John Preto, Las Vegas. Hey, can you articulate the financial repercussions of a disaster not properly handled?
Preto.
No, let him answer, and then I'll have a comment.
Okay. Keenan?
So I put a link in the chat from Pew Trust's. The thing that we've always said is, if you mitigate it before the disaster, it costs every dollar you spend in pre-disaster mitigation can save you $6 to $7 in post-disaster mitigation. So I put it down in the Makana chat. It's a great article from Pew Trust, and it talks about the costs of a disaster. Now, they're referring to county government, local governments, things like that. But on a production side, if your client is unhappy, if you didn't properly prepare, that $6 could translate into your reputation being scarred and people not hiring you because your company wasn't prepared enough for the job at hand. So there is a lot of correlation between private productions, public costs. It always costs you 6 to 7 times more than it would have to prepare. So
amen to that. Next question.
Next question in from Lenny Nelson in San Antonio, Texas. Insurance. When is enough enough?
Ooh, that's a hard one to answer. Keenan, do you have any thoughts about how insurance, or were you kind of apart from that side of it because you were in the public side?
So the public side of it still has insurance concerns. When a disaster happens, FEMA's looking at uninsured loss. So if you're a homeowner, you have homeowners insurance, that's going to be your first call. We're going to always tell the citizens to call your homeowners, get a hotel, get things. We'll take care of you if they won't, but we're limited with our resources. When it comes to big productions, you need a good accountant, you need a good attorney, because I am not an attorney and I don't offer legal advice. And in our business, we have finance and admin people. That's all they do. You really need to have a good accountant. You really have to have a good attorney and a good insurance agent for your business policies. That question, Lenny, I would love to be able to answer it to you, but I'm not licensed to sell insurance. So definitely find an agent you trust in your business policies. And I mean, that's a hard one to say, depending on the level of your production, how many millions of dollars in liability and errors, omissions insurance. There's so many different layers there. I think that's something that you have to get comfortable with your agent. And then a lot of the productions are going to ask you to have $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, whatever that is. So depending on what the production is, the higher the production, the higher they're going to require you to have a certificate of insurance for your production. So,
Preto?
I didn't get to comment on my last question. So,
do it now.
So Keenan was our logistics and security director. I'm sorry, what was your position?
Director of operations.
Director of operations for OH Space. And let me tell you, when the zombies come, you want Keenan on your team. This guy is the most prepared guy. 5 different colors of electrical tape, batteries, around the whole camp, solar panels, incredible. I was just amazed. Good work.
I'll correct you though. I had 12 rolls of different colored electrical tape. 12.
There you go. He's a professional. He doesn't want to have that slam on his record. Only 5 rolls? Ha! Chris Widener.
To get back to the actual question, the insurance question really comes down to how much loss can you absorb without going bankrupt? Because you have to have enough to cover your behind so that you don't get behind on anything else, because a financial loss can be devastating to a business of any size. If you're in a $10 million production and everything goes south on you, then, that could be not only not getting that revenue, but, indemnifying someone else's loss, which is really the paranoid in me coming out to make sure that there's enough insurance coverage to indemnify against any kind of, injury or loss to the production. So
I'm going to go on to this and say, your insurance person, your agent or the agent's representative, or who you need to have a human you can talk to. Because I can tell you how many times I faced a situation that was a little unusual, and by calling my agent, I could get a rider tacked out to somebody. I remember I was shooting in a football stadium once, and I think I had $3 million worth of overall liability, and their contract specified I had to have $5 million. I didn't want to buy a new policy or ramp that, but I talked to her and she said, okay, we can do a rider. It's going to cost you this much. It's going to increase it for this month that you're in, and then it'll go back to your original rate. And so I was able to pitch that to the client. They said, that's fine. Let's go ahead and do the stadium shot, and you will be insured for that period of time. So a human being you can talk to who will be able to knock out an insurance cert when you need it to get a rental facility or something like that is worth their weight in platinum. So get a human and form a relationship and take care of it. I think we're ready to go to the next question.
Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona. Batteries, diesel, or propane for backup generators?
And we're not supposed to talk religion here, but we can make an exception here. Keenan, what did you mostly find yourself relying on, or was it all of the above?
You answered my own question. All of the above. So one of our trailers, this is a 55-foot tower trailer that we built. Thanks to Chris Ritchie, he modeled it for us. We built it, and then he built the model after. So I want to give him a plug because it turned out awesome. We used it for training while we were building it. I like the Champion. Okay, so let me preface this back. No brands pay me to be here. So this is just Keenan's used it, and I like stuff. Your mileage will vary. I like the Champion dual fuels. This tower trailer has a 10,000 watt-ish Champion dual fuel. It runs on 2 40-pound propane tanks. You can see it there. So with the Champion dual fuel, we don't put gasoline in it. And there's a reason for that. Propane will not gum up a carburetor or any of the internal mechanisms inside the Champion generator. So we run that exclusively on propane, but if propane supplies are short, I'll dump gasoline into it. So I like all the above. This unit actually, with the IT that's in there, there's a UPS in the bottom. All the Ubiquiti equipment, this is one side of the box. So you can see some of the dual fuel, the IT. So I always say UPS, generator, either diesel, propane, or both. We have all of the above. And when you build, the biggest thing to look at when you're building backup generation is build for excess capacity. So the minimum size generator I'm going to buy is 150% of the 100% load of the equipment. So if it needs 10,000 watts, I'm doing a 15,000 watt inverter. We're always going to build 150%. There's nothing wrong when you're renting a generator to rent. If you need 100 kW, rent 125, 150, 200. It does. The cost is so negligible when you're looking at power. The other thing is the bigger generators. I absolutely despise the 60 kWs because they are loud. They're just garbage. They work, don't get me wrong, but if I'm going to do a generator, the minimum I'm ever going to rent is 100 kW because the hundreds just purr. So they're at idle more often. If I need 50 kW, I'm going to get 100, and I'll always start at 100 kW for a towable generator. The fuel tanks are diesel; they're underneath. You have a lot longer runtime. So all of the above. We have batteries with solar panels, dual fuel generators. You can never have enough methods of power. Never enough. Even when we go out to the rocket launch, my trailer's got a 200 amp hour battery with solar panels and a charge controller, and I can run it off my truck. And I mean, that we could talk for 3 days on power. So,
Chris Widener, you want to dig in on this?
I think we could have a second hour on just batteries, let alone generators. And I completely agree with what Keenan said. I do have a little bit different philosophy when it comes to power generation. Batteries are always a must. I'm not a big fan of diesel. Propane is always the way to go, although you really have to look at the rating on the generator, because most dual or tri-fuel generators do have a little bit lower power generation on propane. So that really needs to go into the math. I've become a big fan of parallel hookups for generators. So if you're running at 75% of the capacity of one generator, if you have two with a paralleling device, you can balance that load, get a little better runtime, and then if one generator does happen to fail, you're not having anything drop out. But it really gets into power management when you're charging your battery banks or battery packs, and whether those can do the continuous draw to everything else. And especially for video production, even a micro dropout can really gum up the works. So.
Peter Sargent?
You left off one fuel type, which is I've run generators that were run off of JP1, but a little noisier. I will grant you that. They're a little noisier, but they're a little larger too. But how often do you recommend? I mean, I would test my backup generators even in my kits at least once a month.
So as the county, we tested and ran every single generator every single week.
Okay.
Fuel up Fridays is what we called it. So we had MRE Mondays where everybody had to eat MREs for lunch on Mondays, just to be prepared. For those that don't know what MRE is, it's a military meal ready to eat. We do MRE Mondays and fuel up Fridays. So
as long as they have Tabasco sauce and M&Ms, I'm fine.
We should have MRE lunch with office hours.
Yeah, that would be great. So Fridays, we pulled out every generator. They ran for a minimum of 30 minutes each. Always. Oil was checked, fuel was checked, run them. Every single asset went outside because we had a 10,000 square foot warehouse. So everything had to be pulled out and ran at least 30 minutes, mostly an hour. Some of the bigger stuff, the diesel generators, we'd run an hour. The bigger problem is, and I'm not a huge fan of diesel, but the big gen sets are all diesel. That's what you're going to get. If you're on the 100 to 200 plus, you're going to be on diesel, and we want to make sure they don't gel up. So we always ran winter blend fuel, our fuel provider. And that's something to consider. So when you're looking at power, if you're in San Diego, there's no such thing as winter blend fuel. But if you're in North Dakota, you need to make sure that the generator that comes from the rental house, they've gotten rid of this, because a lot of times, they have a 100-gallon plus fuel tank, and you can see where there's summer blend in there, and they're now deploying it to your site, and you're going to have a gelling situation. So you either want to meet with the vendor and make sure that they put anti-gel, any of those treatments into the tank, or that they can verify that the tank has winter blend fuel, because diesel does not like sub-zero temperatures, where gasoline and propane are good. It all depends on size. If I'm doing under 10K, I'm going to do the dual fuel champions. Chris Widener is correct. There are 2 ratings on the generators for gas and diesel. We base everything we do on the lowest rated number on any generator. We don't even look at a lot of them will do max or running watts and surge watts. We base everything we build on the running watts. Nothing more than that. So when I do my 150% calculation, it's on the running watts. So some of those ratings, you just wonder if the company just throws a number out and says, oh, this will be good. So we always go low. When it comes to power, it is so much cheaper to buy more generation capacity today than it is to tell your client, yeah, we could have rented 125 kW, but we rented a 60 and I'm sorry, we ran out of power. The other thing is, depending on climate, we're doing HVACs. You're doing air conditioning in trailers, vans, production trucks. So when the manufacturer builds those production buses, they're building it to 150 to 200% because they know you're going to have the air conditioning cranked. Where the heat load in BTUs goes up exponentially with people. And that's something that's never considered in. If you have a command bus that's set at, it has 15,000 BTU air conditioners, they may or may not keep up when you put 30 people in that room. So those are things that, you really want to have a power generation guy and an HVAC guy in your back pocket to say, hey, we're building this studio. How much excess capacity? We use that term a lot, excess capacity. You can build that into your production because the client wants it to work. If you're at 100 kW rental or 150 kW rental, is the client even going to nitpick and go, well, I picked a bigger generator to make sure our production was good? It's not one of the pain points that the client's going to come back and go, put a smaller generator. I don't think any client in the history of video production is ever going to tell you to skimp on that.
Chris, you have a last thought?
Well, and to circle back around a little bit, what Keenan said was very true. And surge loads, motor loads, anything that has a motor is going to be one of the things you really have to calculate into the loads, because you want to make sure that you're not counting on the surge capacity of whatever genset you are using to handle that. So he's very right in that regard.
Next question is going to drill down on this a little more.
David Brady in New York asks, what are the steps in determining power requirements in mobile setups? Keenan, you want to walk us through how you...
So everything can be calculated. Power is power. We all know our friend Ohm. You want to look at the running watts of every single device in your cadre of equipment, and then multiply that by 1.5. Now, if you have electrical motors, air conditioners, things like that, you want to look at their peak starting, locked rotor amps. You want to take the locked rotor amps and add that into your production. And then when I get that number, if it's 5,000 watts, I'm automatically multiplying it by 150%. Because again, power generation is super cheap. Failure is super expensive. So if as I add everything up, and you can look at computers have a 300 watt power supply monitor, everything has a number, and you're adding all those up on a spreadsheet, and then you're multiplying it by 1.5 minimum. There's no shame in saying I need double I need. Our whole camp is 15,000 watts. Don't bring me a 30 kW generator, bring me 100 or a 50, so those things, when you're renting them, when we looked at it for the new Garage Rocketeers project, I think we needed 100, and we said, we needed 70, and we're going to rent 125 kW. That's almost double what we really need, but it also builds in the people that bring their MacBooks and other PAs that come in and directors come in, and they're bringing, hey, can I charge my phone? Well, this takes, 20 to 60 watts to charge. So those have to be figured in, that people are going to, if you use an open outlet, you've seen it at the airport. If there's an open outlet, they're going to use it. So, we always want that headroom of 150% minimum. And depending on how big the production is, you may want to look at dual gensets with a parallel connection. Your grips and electrician guys are going to be your friend on that to build the camps out. We use the spider boxes, which are the 5 big cables in, breaks out to 50 amps, and you can move it all around. And power is an art, especially when there's nothing.
Amen to that. Peter, real quick, and Chris, real quick. Peter, start with you.
The only comment I would make on top of that, particularly with things that have motors in it, power sequencing is an interesting question. So if you're trying, don't have 10 people go around and start 10 things at once. Have one person walk around and power things up so that you don't blow out the breakers on the generator, because I have seen that done multiple times.
Come on. It's more fun to send guys to each individual one and then drop a flag and see if it all survives.
Well, I'm often reminded of that scene from Apollo 13 where Fred Hayes was, not Fred Hayes, but the lunar module, the command module pilot was trying to figure out how to start the thing up again to restart on the batteries and had to keep it below 1.9 amps.
Chris, go ahead, Keenan, finish up.
So I actually created a product called Gen Saver, and it was a cascading timer. So it would interrupt the thermostat signal on an RV air conditioner, and it would start a 2-minute timer when power was restored, and it would cascade. So this one was 2 minutes, this one was 3 minutes, this one was 4 minutes. And when you restarted an RV or a command bus, that timer would kick in, and the first air would start. A minute later, the second air would start. And so we created this little module that and all it did was interrupt the 24 volt on the thermostat, which was calling for air conditioning. So there's some products that you can make creatively. Our command posts are full of air conditioning and computers. And you're right, Peter, when you start that up, the surge is, your EIC really needs to know the startup and shutdown procedures of the bus. And it goes back to what Jonas was saying with, testing everything. Go flip a breaker, see what happens. I'm not condoning that, but in your production, you should test that.
And Chris Widener, real quick.
Real fast. With motors, you're looking at generally 3 to 20 times the running amperage to start up. And there are some devices you can get that will modulate that to decrease the surge. But yeah, all of the things that Peter said about sequencing are critically important.
And next question.
Jack Cannon, Phoenix, Arizona. What does ICS stand for? And why should production folks be familiar with it?
Keenan, you want to help us?
So ICS is kind of the bane of everyone's existence. After 9/11, they realized people were not speaking the same language. So FEMA, in their infinite wisdom, said, let's create a training program called Incident Command System. Now, it's became more mainstream. Obviously, government uses it. We have to talk ICS. But it's really sticks and boxes. Your incident commander's here, his assistants, and then the workers are below it, or the bosses are below it, then the workers are below them. So it's really a system of sticks and boxes. You guys do this every day in production. We know who the client is. We know who the director is. We know how that hierarchy works. ICS takes it and teaches how incident command should work. It does really apply for private industry, because if you're, for instance, I'll use the example when the Amazon warehouse collapsed, they were trained in ICS. The Amazon plant manager would be the incident commander, but because there were fatalities and people missing, county government, we had legal authority over the building to do search and rescue, fire suppression, all of those things. So then an Amazon person, because he was trained in incident command system, said, well, what am I now? And well, you're the liaison officer. So now you're the liaison between Amazon corporate and our county response. I will tell you, it worked amazing. We didn't have a bunch of Amazon people coming up and crawling around. He would take care of his people. He would give his CEO briefings back and forth. What does the county need? So ICS just formalizes that. And I'm working on a program now of a virtual training that you guys can take to learn ICS and production mitigation. So that'll be something forthcoming. We're not quite done with it yet, but we're really close.
Jonas?
And it brings up a great point, because we have the same issue in production. Like, you really need to, in development, we have something like a domain language model where you say, like, this is this. Like, what is a TD? What is an engineer? Like, what is the director? What do they do? Because from production to production, it is different. And especially in case of emergencies, failovers, you need to have your declared roles. Like, maybe we put together the graphics and the playout op. Who takes over playout if they need to fiddle with graphics because last minute changes or something. So it's really also important for production to know the roles and talk about that and make sure that when someone says, bring in the slate, that might be the frame store on the Carbonite, but on an atem, it has to be the graphic system. Like, make sure that you know what you're talking about and that everyone is on the same page. Because otherwise, in case of an emergency, you'll get everyone confused.
Yeah, I used to do a ton of VO for the Bureau of Land Management. Eventually, they passed me along to the National Fire Research Institute, and I ran across that all the time. Having an incident command system that is structured, that everybody knows how it works, and is very formal is critical, particularly in that case, because a fire doesn't respect any state or jurisdictional boundaries, and it keeps crossing things. And so you have to escalate or diminish based on that. And if people are talking a different language for the same things, everything falls apart. So let's go on to the next question.
Jonas Dottel from Stuttgart, Germany asked, have you thought about providing training and or certifications for people who want to learn more about this?
Interesting. Keenan?
So we have, and I'm going to try to cut to it if I can, if my screen will cooperate. So this is the disaster group. So we're doing an online training portal, and it will actually allow you to do certifications. We're working right now with FEMA to be able to give you a FEMA certificate. So that was the one thing that we wanted to do. Like when you take ICS courses, it's FEMA open source, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. If you've never been in it, it's quite daunting. It's kind of like walking into that production for the first time as the PA and not kind of not knowing where you're supposed to go and hoping you don't get in trouble and that somebody doesn't hire you again because you were in the way. So the idea is with our training platform, you'll be able to start with the ICS basics and work your way up. And then there'll be parts that'll tie into video production or, houses of worship. We're going to try to segregate it off and bring a bunch of those things in. So more on that later. We're hoping to have it launched in the next month or so.
Excellent. Next question.
Paul Valhus, Austin, Texas, is in to ask a question. What's the most cost-effective battery array versus gas diesel that will keep a large amount of infrastructure running in a power outage for a really long time?
Ooh, maybe a tough one. Keenan, what do you think?
Well, when you said cost-effective and battery array, those two things don't work very well together. Our guys, everybody had the sealed lead acid, then the AGMs, and the battery that we've really went with are lithium iron phosphate. So LiFePO4, LiFePO4, they're on Amazon. I just bought a 200 amp hour, which is a pretty decent battery. It weighs about 60 pounds. It's the size of a 4D car battery, and it was about $600. So the batteries are more expensive, but they have a deeper discharge rate. They're lighter, and you can get more energy density. The battery technology every year just gets better and better and better. Elon's driving that with the electric cars, and they have to be better. The lithium iron phosphates are the batteries that we use. I have 2 solar panels on my little trailer when I go camping, and I can run my Starlink and my refrigerator and everything all weekend and not even worry about it. So I also have a backup where I can run it from my truck. So while I'm driving down the road, the Jeep will put power into a Renogy controller, which puts power into that battery and controls it. So I pull up, and my 200 amp hour battery is 100% charged. So we can talk in after hours about Jack Cannon. Him and I go overlanding Widener and Fenwick. We all do this, so we can talk about batteries for days also. But LiFePO, pay a little more, and I'm sure Widener will jump in here and say the same thing, I hope.
Well, we're going to try to accelerate a little bit because we've still got, I believe, 8 more questions, and we're under 15 minutes, a good chunk under 15 minutes. So we're going to try to do these in about 2 minutes apiece. Let's dive into the next one.
Peter Sargent, Round Rock, Texas, and here on our panel, how do you handle credentials for contractors for security purposes?
Keenan?
So when we are, from a county perspective, we had a badging system. Everybody had a badge. They were credentialed, background check, things like that. So I designed a system that actually used, and I don't know how to say it cleanly, beer garden wristbands. You've seen when you go to a beer garden or some type of a festival, and I had those created that said contractor, resident, vendor, and they had a QR code that our county badging system could credential that person. We weren't giving them an ID card. We were giving them a wristband, the Tyvek type wristband. So that's an easy, cheap way to do it. You can order the Tyvek wristbands online. You can have them printed with whatever you want them to say. And then you're keeping that QR code, which matches the data on the wristband that you could either put into a simple spreadsheet if you didn't have the budget, you could just have those numbers sequentially, and Bill Davis is 1012, Peter Sargent's 1013, Mitch Hill's restricted from the area, any of that stuff. I'm just kidding. You'd be 1014. So, but you could do it as a simple wristband for the contractors. I'm not going to issue them a plastic card because it takes a long time to print the card. Even though we have the system, you're spending a couple minutes per person, you're scanning their driver's license, things like that. So it could be as simple as having the canned cards that just say visitor 1, visitor 2, and you're recording who that person is. Our system was a little bit more complex, but a simple spreadsheet with those wristbands is easy, Peter. And then you can also do a check-in, check-out where whoever has that spreadsheet shows that John Preto's in here at 8:02 and he left at 8:49. So you could have somebody filling that in and filling it out. And the neat thing with the spreadsheet is when John comes back tomorrow, you can also log him in at 8:02 and gone at 10:30. So the spreadsheet would show the record of John Preto across the line, and he would wear that same wristband throughout the whole event since they are waterproof and things like that.
All right, let's go on to the next question.
Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas asked, how do you secure and protect your water supply? For example, storage and purification.
Keenan?
So I have a portable filtration system. It's a multi-stage filter. So water storage and filtration is hard because you need to take the sediment out first, then the smaller micron, and keep working your way down. So Amazon has some really neat multi-stage filtration systems that have 4 filters. And then the very last step of that is a UV purification. So you want to look at something that has multi-stage filters and then UV, because the UV kills any of the biologicals that could get through the micron filtering. The idea is if you're pumping out of a lake, a creek, a stream, whatever, you're going to pull in a lot of sediment. So that's where the first filter, they sequentially get the water cleaner. For storage, we always recommend dark containers. There's something about it. The blue barrels are okay, but you want something that's not clear. If you can store it in your basement, if you have a basement, you want to keep it from getting too hot, too cold, things like that. We always said 1 gallon per person per day during a disaster. I think that's a little low. I like to drink coffee, so I need, a little more than that. But if you're looking at it, you want to have at least 1 gallon per person in your household per day. So that goes to the production too. If you don't have a main supply, the other nice thing is even on these bigger venues, if you are using water, you want your own filter. You just want to have that last mile filter to say, okay, I know the water's clean. So.
Perfect. Next question.
Raj Shandil in Los Angeles, California. Have you built a Starlink remote stack?
Keenan will start us. Now we have Chris wants to get on it. Keenan, go ahead.
We've built several of them. I have a Starlink. Jack Cannon has a Starlink. Chris Widener has a Starlink. Audio Greg has a Starlink. So I think between us, we have 4 stacks. I will tell you on the Starlink, and as we've told everybody, Mark Giuliani and I talked about it, make sure they're on days before your production. Starlink has this big thing of sending updates. They're constantly an evolving system. So if you have a production next Friday, I would leave the Starlink on the air for at least a week before. Worst case, a few days. But every time you boot the Starlink up, you have updates that come down. Your signal degradation comes down because it's downloading and you're not getting to use all that bandwidth. We use that as a kind of our secondary or tertiary backup. So I'm always going to try to go with fiber, then LTE, then Starlink. 08 Space, the Starlink worked great. We had very little dropout. Most people thought the little blips that they saw were from YouTube. So it needs to be in your production. I own the RV version. Jack owns the home version. And I think Chris Widener has the home version. I can take mine anywhere. I've used it on camping trips. We've used it all over the desert Southwest, and it's been just flawless. It is satellite and it is maturing technology. So what I told Mark Giuliani was buy the commercial version. It's $500 a month and $2,500 for the equipment. So it's a bigger pain point. But if you're going to do this for production and you need it every month, buy the commercial version.
And real quick, Chris and Jonas wants to weigh in. Chris, take it away.
Yeah, Keenan's right. I do have the residential version with roaming turned on. And I can honestly say I've used it more than I expected when I originally got it. This This is actually it on the front of my Toyota FJ in an emergency situation where we needed a backup at one of the sites. And it worked quite well.
Jonas?
One of the really cool things with Starlink, and it is still satellite based, but the latency that you can get through a Starlink satellite is not comparable to the more traditional satellites, which also allow you more options for bonding with LTE and others, where we go into the secondary path out, where you then can also solve degradation issues with the Starlink that way.
Fair enough. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael is in with a question. Yesterday, it was mentioned that telecom networks, cellular, for example, are more resilient than typical IT networks. With the telecom industry adopting so much tech from the IT world, could IT networks catch up in terms of resiliency?
Keenan, you want to weigh in before we go to Chris and Jonas?
So I agree with a lot of that because telecom networks have to work, but in a disaster, they don't work. The cellular network gets overloaded. Everybody's trying to call their family members. The cell towers have radio channels. So while they are more resilient sometimes, yeah, a campus Wi-Fi, I'm not going to trust that because it's already a lower QoS. The Wi-Fi on a school or a church, it's meant for the convenience of the residents or attendees. When we build our infrastructure, as we saw on OH Space, I had the primary network, and then I also made the secondary network, which I would consider the non-resilient IT, was the LTE for the kids on Netflix. So we kind of did that too. We QoS'd it out that production only had their own network. So, but when we're on disasters, I'm building everything. So I'm putting the routers in, the Ubiquiti Dream Machines, doing the switches, running network cables. So we have a level of resiliency that's probably better than telco because we don't have the general public trying to hit my network. That's the thing. And so when you're in your production methodologies, you need to think about it also. Let's build our own network. Let's bring everything to the table and let's put who we want on it. And at OH Space, Widener was kind of the Nazi of who got to use the networks because we were protecting infrastructure from the kids on Netflix. I want to watch TV. I want to do this. I need to send video. I want to FaceTime with my grandma. Well, they weren't allowed to be on the production network. So if you have kind of that IT or frequency controller on your production, whoever that person is, to say, hey, I'm sorry, director, this is the only, if you're putting it on your iPhone, I can only give you this network. And they have to kind of be the mean one to say, I can't put you on production. I have to put you on the backup network. So a little frequency discipline is what I would call it with who gets what Wi-Fi
This
password.
is so interesting that we still have a ton of questions to get through. We're probably not going to make it through all of them. So Chris and Jonas, do it real quick. And Peter, just very quick comments. And then let's see if we can get as many of these as possible.
It all comes down to the type of traffic you're trying to prioritize. And it's easier to try and prioritize telco traffic on emergencies like 911 than it is to try and change QoS through an IT system. And that's really what it comes down to.
Jonas?
Everything can be done with time and money. The question is, should they and do they want to? Telecom, like Keenan said, that's a 24/7 service that needs to be provided. If you're talking about corporate IT or more infrastructure on like a campus level, oh no, a couple students don't have their network for like an hour or something. That's not that much of an issue as, emergency services don't work for an hour in a region. So that's also like, what is the impact of failure, which then also guides how much time and money and effort are we spending on it. Sure, you can make your IT network as resilient as carrier networks, but you still at some point will rely on carrier networks to get your data out if you don't have like a direct dark fiber link to a internet exchange. So you might not exceed it, but if you want to spend a lot of money on it, you sure can do.
Pete?
Yeah, I mean, when this question came up, it was more of a different use case. It was how do I get the shelter in place or Amber Alert out? And that's the telco network, because that's what that's there. One of the things it's there for. The phones react to it. Whereas exactly what Jonas has said and Keenan has said is, if you're designing something, now it becomes a cost-benefit trade-off, to be honest with you, is whether or not the campus can design a highly resilient network or not.
So we are going to do one more only because the question is very cool from Chris Fenwick, and then we're going to cut this off. I think Keenan indicated a willingness to slip into after hours at some point, whether it's today or at another time, and handle more of the questions of this. And it's been so popular that who knows, maybe Alex will decide we want a second hour on this. So right now, one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Chris Fenwick of Emeryville, California. Can Keenan show us a photo of the cool drawer in the back of his trailer? It looks fantastic.
So I want to make sure if he dug that out, he had a chance to show it.
I did. So here's a drawer that Chris Fenwick created. He shamelessly plugged himself. So this is kind of my shocked. This is my camping trailer, and Chris created a drawer for all my stuff, and the refrigerator sits on top of it. And so if you need woodworking needs, the inventor of the Fenbox or the Tallmaker, Chris Fenwick. So and if you Fenbox.com, that's Chris Fenwick, Fenbox. So he created that for us, and I figured I guess I have to give him a shameless plug.
There you go.
Or one question or one thing that comes up a lot that we talk about, and why he kind of pushed this question in, is organization. When we deploy, cases are organized, things are put in place. You need to, we talk about when Mad in the Kitchen was happening, and Guy brought his grip Jeep. That's something huge, because when we organize it, the joke is always Pelican cases. But, I'll go back to this is one of my deployment trailers, shelving, cases, everything's organized. That can avoid a production disaster if you know where all your gear is. And I would challenge everybody to know everything they've bought. Thanks to office hours, we all purchased a lot of stuff. And do we know where it is? Preto says I'm the most organized overlander yet, which I'm okay with. That's a fine comment to have, but everything is in Husky boxes or Pelican cases and labeled. That can avoid a huge disaster before the disaster.
Great information all the way through here. If people want to reach out to you for more information, Chris, is there a place, or Keenan, is there a place they should take a look if they have specific questions, since we're running a little short here?
Did you call me Chris?
I managed to confuse that for a moment.
Okay. So, my email is right there, ceo@disastergroup.us, and I'm in Discord. So anybody needs something, let me know. On our website, disastergroup.us, you can actually fill out a MailChimp form when we launch the training program. I will promise you guys, I will not spam. I'm not that guy. I hate emails. So I'll only send you one when we launch. We're working on the details right now. There's actually a company in Las Vegas that does the training platform for us. So we'll be able to white label it. If you had a big production company, we could create training just for you. So it's really cool. And it's one of those segments that we really want to help, because, Preto's been in the industry since, 1775. I don't know. Anyway,
it was 1779, but
79. That's what it was. So John and I have talked extensively. Fenwick and I, we've all talked about, bringing, since I am an emergency manager and I retired, there's a lot of stuff that I have. There's more than I can talk about in an hour. We could talk about this. Mark Giuliani and I talked for 2 hours on just Starlink. So we're going to try to put this into a program. If you sign up and fill out the form, that'll kind of be the pre-launch notification when we are launched. And then I'll work out some deal for office hours members.
Excellent. All right. So that's wrapping it up for today. We've got a bunch of stuff coming up. So don't forget Saturday, the kind of next day stuff, transitions to the workforce. John Snyder's going to be talking about October being Disability Awareness Month. And so he's going to discuss a little of that. Wednesday, don't forget next Wednesday, conversations with Tony Mobley. Thursday, Isadora this week with Elle. And an opportunity to learn Isadora, which is an amazing program. Also, Birding with Lois is on the same day. I'm doing the last final cut thing in 2 hours here at noon on today. So thank you. Thank all the panelists who've done a great job today of giving us a lot of information. Well done, one and all. Keenan, it was great having you here to talk about this. It's an important thing that it really can make people's lives easier and save them in circumstances that could be very dangerous. So this is all very important. And finally, thank you to everybody in the back end, and watch the credits as the show finishes up, because it does take a village to put this on every day. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow. May the whispering begin.
My graphic up too fast. I think they may have seen it.
Keenan, that was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Well done.
No problem. Sorry, my throat. I'm not allowed to whisper. Doesn't
That is
work.
all right. That's okay. I'll just whisper twice as much for the rest of us. In fact, I will now start reading the phone book. Starting with aardvark.
Joel just touched his lens, so he needs to wipe it off now.
I'll see you guys all on Monday.
So where do we go from here, Mitchell, to get to after hours breakout room?